Okay, here we are. You are listening, and the little red light's on, and I'm talking. You know what that means? It means it's time to do this. It's time for Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If you're new, let me welcome you. If you're returning, I would like to thank you. How is it going, everyone? I have to admit that I am a little bit out of sorts. All this traveling and not being in my usual routines doesn't exactly put me in a mindset that I like to be in when I do these recordings. But I am determined to make sure that this week's podcast gets out. So we're doing this. I am no longer in England. I am now in Switzerland. I arrived in Switzerland, but 2 hours ago. And last week I came to you from a hotel room in London. I spent a day in London hanging out. Let me give a shout out to my new friend Scott Johnson for taking me around to the Tate Modern and the London Bridge. And just an awesome conversation. It's funny, it's been happening my entire trip. I keep meeting people and having these great conversations. And while I'm having the conversation, I can't help but think in my head, wow, this would be such a good podcast. I mean, I like to have a personal life and not everything needs to be on the podcast, but it's amazing and wonderful how the conversations I'm having on the podcast, people who are listening to that, when they meet me, they want to continue those conversations in person with me. And sometimes we just move on to other stuff, I'm going to get Scott on the podcast. I'm really interested in what he's doing. It was really cool to hang out with you, Scott. Thank you. And then I went to the English countryside. I think I mentioned that too. And the reason that happened is my friend here in Switzerland, her name is Suzanne from Dakini Dance, and I came here a couple years ago. She asked me if I would come and meet her teacher trainees and do some yoga study together, and we did, and we had a good time. And then when she heard I was going to be in London, it coincided with a teacher training and she was doing again. She said, would you come, Jay? So we tacked it on, but it meant that I had this 3 days that I had to figure out what to do with myself. And honestly, I didn't want to just be in a hotel room spending money I don't have. So I kind of had to find a place to crash. And I mentioned that Thea Wildcroft was in the workshop and I had reached out to her. So she invited me to come crash with her in the English countryside, which was awesome. I got to see Neolithic ruins, stone circles, and canals and castles. It was pretty awesome. And you know what was most awesome about it is my whole idea in setting up travel for myself for this year was that I want to see where yoga's happening, what are the spaces that are happening, what are the teachers doing, who's coming, outside of the bubble that I've been in for the last decade. And boy, did I get a really amazing cross-section of yoga cultures already. So I was at Tri Yoga in London, and I think I mentioned last week, Tri Yoga was huge, big scale. Then I went to the countryside with Theo, and I watched her teach a small, intimate class in a village town hall. No joke, the village hall. We went to the village hall and had a class. Then I got to see firsthand her doing yoga with those kids with special needs. I don't know if you guys have seen the video of Thea Wildcroft doing the work that she does with these kids, but if you have, you know what I'm talking about. I got to be in the room with that. I got to meet the kids, which is totally amazing. Totally amazing. And then I got to just hang out with Theo and talk to her about what she's writing about for her PhD, which is all about this like circuit of yoga, or I don't know if you call it yoga, camps, like group camps. They're yoga camps. They're yoga festivals of sorts, but some of them are small scale and some of them are a little bit bigger. But they basically happen in these fields in the English countryside where you get like a couple hundred yoga teachers that come together and like do this incredible stuff. I mean, what it meant to me is I got to see yoga happen across all these different cultures. And my takeaway is that I feel hopeful, I feel encouraged, I feel like, yes, yoga's totally happening out there and there's a lot possible. A lot more than I entertain, I think. I'm always talking about, independent player, you can't make it, or you're big corporate, or how are we going to make enough money? But, I'm looking around, and if it's not about just how are we going to make money, but what could we do? Like, what's possible? Like, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot more possible than I generally allow for. And I'm interested in that. It's definitely not about how big scale or small scale you are. I think it has to do with how you set your sights. What are you looking to do? It's like, I guess that's Peter Blackaby's thing, What are you trying to achieve? Although I don't like achievement, but like, what are you setting your sights on, If you set them clear, I think it's possible. So, whatever that's worth, thank you so much to Theo Wildcroft for hooking me up and being just a totally awesome person. I recorded a podcast with her. You guys will get to hear it in a couple of weeks. So cool. Thank you to everybody in London who showed up to the gigs. And just awesome. Today on the podcast, I am talking to Tiffany Cruikshank from Yoga Medicine. And I don't know why, but for some reason, I had like some wrong idea about her. I don't know. I don't know where it came from. And it wasn't really like a formed idea or a real opinion because I never really looked at what she was doing. But I think, I saw her come up and saw it said yoga medicine. And for some reason, the mood I was in the last time I looked at what Tiffany Cruikshank was doing, I don't know why I do that sometimes. That's one of the things I like about this podcast is then I talk to somebody and I find out, like, you don't know what you're talking about, man. This person really's got something neat that they're doing. And that's certainly true of Tiffany. I also discovered, as I was getting ready to talk to her, that my friend Christina Kuhn from the Yogi Underground, which I'm going to be back at the end of April. Christina is a yoga medicine teacher because I saw her show up on one of these new yoga medicine videos that were coming out. I was like, that's Christina. Christina's awesome. And if Christina thinks they're cool, then what's my problem? So I'm glad to have had this conversation with Tiffany to dispel my wrong-headedness and to just kind of, find out about her and what she does. You guys will get to hear it today. Before we do, let me drop my stuff. I'm going to be in Armonk, New York, February 3rd. I'm going to be in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, February 16th through 18th. I'm going to be doing a 2-weekend long intensive in Easton, Pennsylvania, March 2nd through 4th and 9th through 11th. I'm going to be in Japan again, March 16th through 25th. And then, as I mentioned, I'm going to be in Falls Church, Virginia, April 27th through 29th. You can find out about all of those gigs and listen to the archives of this podcast and read my blog and find my online yoga video offerings at jbrownyoga.com. You could also show some support for the podcast. I'd surely appreciate it if you did. You might go to a blog or podcast page and make a direct donation, or go to iTunes and write a review and give us some stars. That would be very kind and very cool, and I would appreciate it if you did it. Let me also just give you another heads up. Next week, I'm talking to Amina Nehru from the Yoga Service Council about their new best practices for yoga in the criminal justice system. And then the week after that is the 100th episode of this podcast with Richard Freeman. I'm going to say something about both of those podcasts on the other side, so we can touch base then. For now, I think it's time. Let's go ahead and listen to this talk I had with Tiffany Cruikshank. Hello?
Hey, Jay, it's Tiffany.
Hey, Tiffany. How you doing?
I'm good. How's your day going?
So far, so good. Thanks for ringing me up. You hit the button just before I did.
Nice.
Appreciate it. Cool. Where are you right now? Are you on the West Coast?
Yeah, I'm in Seattle. I think you're in Brooklyn, right?
No. I moved from Brooklyn to Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow. How do you like that?
So far, so good. I needed to get out of Brooklyn. And it's too long a story to tell right now. Been told on this podcast before how I ended up in Pennsylvania, but I've been here for about 3-4 months, and I'm not missing Brooklyn.
Yeah, I lived in Brooklyn a little bit too, and yeah, I mean, it's nice sometimes to settle down a little bit. At least that's what I found. Get out of it.
Yeah, well, I think, I moved to Brooklyn like in my earlier time in my life, and you make decisions in your early 20s. I think some of them were based on this idea about what I thought was cool. Like living in New York and living in Brooklyn was like what I wanted to be cool, and that was where you went to be cool. But then you're like in your 40s and you got kids, and you're like, is this cool anymore? I don't know.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I have 2 sleeping right now, so
all right.
Hopefully,
well,
I have little signs like "Be quiet." We're recording.
Yes.
So,
well, it's okay if they interrupt. It wouldn't be the first time my little ones have barged in on me while I've been doing this, so it would be nothing
Nice.
new.
Nice.
And I do appreciate you stealing away and giving me some of your time. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me. I look forward to it.
Cool. Well, we've never met, but we do have a mutual friend of this podcast, actually. I just was getting ready to talk to you, and I noticed Christina Kuhn was one of the yoga medicine teachers on your new online course. Christina's been on this podcast twice now, actually, which is very rare. She's one of the few people who've ever been on the podcast twice. And she and I go back some years. I didn't know you guys. I mean, I guess I knew she had studied with you, but I hadn't put it together. So we have that friend. It's pretty cool to see her on your course. And also cool, I thought, usually there's a person at the head of whatever the school is, and they're usually the most prominently featured person. But you have a bunch of your teachers in that course, it seemed to me.
Yeah. No, I have so much respect for all of our teachers. I think we have some really, I feel really grateful to have some really fantastic teachers on our team. And obviously there's many fantastic teachers out there now. But yeah, I love Christina. I just saw her last week. She was at our Napa training. So very
cool. Yeah. Well, I guess where I would want to start with you is that, I mean, your thing is called yoga medicine. And I from what I know, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, you've been calling your thing that since long before, yoga therapy had an 800-hour standard, and Yoga Alliance put out a policy on yoga therapy language,
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that you have degrees and other stuff, acupuncture, sports medicine, plant biology. So you have kind of training outside of yoga to sort of back up the word medicine, I guess. And so I'm wondering, what came first? Did yoga come before these other studies, or did you study this other stuff before you got into yoga?
Well, I mean, I started studying holistic medicine when I was 14. I mean, the short story of it is that I started studying holistic medicine and herbs and herbal medicine, and around the same time I found yoga. So I was teaching yoga through college, through Chinese medicine school, through seeing patients. Yeah, so I don't know. For me, they kind of go side by side.
All right. Well, how is it that you at age 14 get into like holistic medicine? I mean, when I was 14, I didn't even know there was such a thing as holistic medicine.
Yeah, I let's say, put it in a short story. I struggled a lot as a teenager. I think like everyone does. I think for me, I tend to be a pretty intensely focused individual, and I was teased a lot as a kid, through grade school, through my teens.
And what were you?
It was really tough on me.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I actually don't want it to be too short. I'm curious about, like, I'm curious because I ask only. I don't mean to like pry, and you only say as much as you want. But for me, I'm always interested. There seems to me like often kind of an initial wound or like an initial thing that really needs to be healed, and that ultimately becomes a like kind of driving force behind what someone does. So, what were the kids teasing you about?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty young at the time. I think a lot of it was I remember one really clearly, them calling me a dog, and, they would bark at me. And then, when I started running, I got really into track, then they would call me Greyhound. And, I'd walk through the halls and they would bark at me. And when I got older, other girls started getting boobs, and clearly I never got that one. But, so they would tease me, like, oh, is that a board in your shirt? Are you happy to see me? And they would sing Under the Boardwalk to me, which now I look back at and it isn't really that funny. Like, it's not even that witty. But yeah, I think looking back at it, probably, mostly what they saw was my irritation with it. That probably, pushed them to tease me more. But gosh, it really got at me, and I wasn't really able to share it with my parents. My parents found out, they would egg our house and TP our house, and I remember them throwing like perfume bottles at our house, and it was just really nasty stuff. And I think as a teenager, or I guess this was preteens, even grade school, just never really feeling like my parents switched my school at a young age, and I never really felt like I had like a core group of friends. I played tennis, which was an individual sport. I see our daughter now, or my inherited daughter now. She plays soccer, and I'm just so happy. Like, I think group sports are so great because you get a core group of friends, and I just never really felt like I fit in, And I think all kids probably feel that to some extent, but I really struggled with kind of finding my place. And for a while, my parents are really religious, really Christian, and really conservative. And for a while, I turned to religion. I got super into it and led a Bible study. I was like 12 years old. And
did your parents switch your school because of the bullying, or just they switched the schools and you had to make new friends?
No, the bullying was after I switched schools. So I switched schools, I guess it was in 4th grade, maybe. And, I had a group of friends before that, and it was a small Christian school. They switched me because they didn't have report cards. They didn't give grades. So my parents really wanted to make sure that, I was keeping up in school, and, they wanted me to go to a public school and have grades and report cards and keep me on track, which probably was better in the long term. But when I got there, it seemed like everyone had their own groups, and I don't know, I think I'm kind of an awkward person. I think people think, to run around and teach all these things and be up there in front of people, you must be really good with people. But I think my personality can be just a little different, unique.
Well, that's interesting. I'm probing you some because, like, just yesterday, my wife, she took my 7-year-old daughter into Brooklyn to visit some of her old friends from Brooklyn because her birthday is this month, and she thought that she would like that. But when she met with her friends, they went to this museum. It's like these two friends of hers, they've been in the same class all year, and Roz has been away, and they were like, having all this like whispering to each other and inside jokes, and my wife felt really bad, and she wasn't really sure like how much my daughter took it in. She didn't seem like visibly upset, but she kept saying, "Hey, what are you guys talking about?" And then and we were starting to realize, oh no, she's getting older, and that stuff's going to happen,
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah. I mean, it's tough as a parent now to see it too. It's like, gosh, having, my partner's has teenagers, and, it's always hard to watch as an onlooker. I don't know how much you can do about it. It's cool to see all this, popping up about bullying, and, to see a bunch of, athletes and stuff embrace it and support it. And I mean, for me, I think I just took it really internally, and, I kind of stuck out. I turned to religion for a while, and then kind of felt like that didn't really help me. I turned to sports. I played really competitive tennis and thought, maybe, screw it all. I'm just going to, go out and make a name for myself. And I kind of lost sight of that and thought, oh, maybe I'm just going to try new friend groups. And I kind of got into drugs. And I mean, it got pretty dark for me. I tried at one point to take my own life when I was in my early teens, and obviously, luckily, that didn't go as planned. And so, luckily, my parents were just like, God, what are we going to do? And they sent me off to rehab, and I think I got caught with, what started is I got caught with pot in high school, and my parents freaked out and, of course, sent me to rehab, which wasn't very helpful, because then I just saw how well everyone else was doing, and then I just felt like a rookie.
Oh, so see, that's crazy. I had that happen to another friend of mine too, when like the rehab actually makes you more of a drug addict than you were before you got in there.
My type A personality, of course, was like, I'm going to do this right. So I ran away and lived on the street for a while, and kind of eventually hit bottom and went home. And my parents sent me, luckily took me back and sent me off to this wilderness program, which completely changed my life.
Where they like send you to like live off the land in the woods, like survival?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a program run by Mormons, actually, surprisingly, because my parents were very Christian. And it was a program called Anasazi in Arizona in the White Mountains. And I was there for a couple months. It's different for everyone. You're done when they feel like you're ready. And you get very little food. You're foraging and surviving. And, you got a couple of pairs of clothes. And
were you like a willing participant in that, or were they like, you got to go?
I wasn't at first. And then I came around and was intrigued and interested. And, there's a period when you're there at the beginning where you're really resistant. But eventually, God, I loved it. I mean, I felt, as a 14-year-old, I was 14 at this time. And as a 14-year-old girl, learning how to survive, you're so uncomfortable in your skin, is when those hormones start hitting. As a woman, as a girl, it was just really empowering to feel like I had some tools, not only to survive, but there was a man on one of our, what we called trail walkers, he was an herbalist as well, and he would take me out on plant walks, and I just fell in love with it. This ability to not only help myself, but to help people around me, and to feel like I had some contributing role in helping others, and I just felt this need to do something and contribute in some way that was really meaningful. And so when I got home, that was when I found yoga. There weren't any studios then, at least where I lived. I think there was probably one or two in LA. But
where were you?
I was in Phoenix.
Phoenix, that's right. And so, wow, I'm also really intrigued by that, like the time spent in the desert and like kind of discovering like the wonder of plants and nature and their properties.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, like that's because just to say, like, I had a pretty dark period of time, and yoga was kind of the thing that brought me out of it. And one of the things that seems really central to that is kind of this sense of wonder to life that I didn't have before. And now I grew up in the suburbs, and then I moved to the big city, and I've never spent a lot of time. Right now in Pennsylvania, where I moved to, I can walk 5 minutes and go on some trails. That's like a first in my life. So for me, like whenever I go, it's like there's just this wonder to it, and I imagine that would have been super helpful to try to come out of that dark place.
Yeah, it was definitely a special place for me. I mean, I think there's something magical about being out in nature. And, obviously I've spent a lot of time on a plane and in the city now. I'm kind of more of a city girl, but there's something magical about those moments. And for me back then, it was it definitely changed my life. It changed the course of my life and my path. And just being out there and not needing things. I remember my mom getting really upset because they like wouldn't let us have toothpaste and like, stuff for my face. I had, acne like every girl does at 16 or 14. And she wanted me to take the stuff from my dermatologist. I remember her getting really upset about it, but then feeling really relieved. Like I didn't have any of that stuff. They wouldn't allow it. They didn't make exceptions. So, but my skin got better. I felt better. Being out there was just I don't even know how to put words to it, but it was really empowering. We would learn all these different skills. Obviously the first one you learn is how to make fire and foraging and plants and all these different tools and things you would make along the way to survive was just, it changed my life. And for me, not just the survival, but the healing aspect of it. When I came back and I started studying with an herbalist there nearby, this whole idea of the environment around you providing what you need for your health and wellness. And it really intrigued me. I think still to this day, of course.
Yeah, well, not only did that kind of spark your trajectory, but it also means that, like, if the Armageddon comes, you can survive, right?
Hopefully I still remember it. This is, 25 years ago or so?
Yeah, still, I never had no training like that, so that's good training to have somewhere in the back of your mind. Wow. All right, so it does seem like, at least initially, it started with herbs.
Yeah, and I mean, I found yoga right after I came home. So to me, people always ask me about the two. I think they really go together for me, and I don't know that one's more important than the other, but I think, in some ways, yoga is kind of learning this owner's manual to live in our skin and not really be restrained by it or defined by it, but to be able to interact with and live and isn't really too dissimilar from holistic medicine, and obviously there's more to all of these things. But
all right, so how long were you in the desert before they decided you were good to leave?
It was a little over 2 months, I think maybe
right.
2.5 months.
All right, and so then what's the yoga scene like in Phoenix or whatever when you get back at 14 or 15?
Well, there weren't any studios then. One of my first teachers was a man who's now passed away, who was an Ashtanga teacher. I didn't really know what Ashtanga was at the time. It was just, I remember seeing a wooden sign with yoga and a phone number, and eventually I remembered it. My mom would drive me, and the first classes I went to were at a chiropractor's office with, maybe 5 other women, probably in their 50s or 60s, and I just loved it. I just loved the way that I felt. And eventually he invited me to a practice at his house that was right off of his garage, a little room off of his garage where maybe 4 of us fit in there. And it was, I didn't know at the time, but it was more of a Mysore practice. And I just remember walking in and hearing the breath and people moving. And obviously growing up really athletic, I loved the physicality of it. There was something really intriguing about, this kind of somewhat gymnastic physicality, but then something deeper with the breath and the movement. And it's just really cool to feel like I could move and breathe and be comfortable and for a moment in my skin.
And so your Christian parents were okay with yoga?
Oh, well, let's be clear. First off, they were happy that I wasn't doing drugs and living on the streets.
Yeah, okay. It's all relative, right? Yeah, yoga's better than heroin. That's right.
Always worried about it being a cult. I think the first time they saw me on the cover of a magazine, that they finally realized that maybe this is a real thing, and which is silly. I remember thinking, God, like, really, that's what brought you around?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think up until maybe 10 years ago, when yoga got really big, they were always thinking it was some kind of cult, and I was kind of the black sheep of the family.
Yeah, and all right, so at that age, you're still high school age. Are you in high school and going to classes?
So I did for a little bit, and then I really knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I wanted to study, so I just started doing correspondence, and I finished up really quickly and started college when I was 16, and
Wow.
I went to college hoping that I would be able to study herbal medicine somehow, thinking like ethnobotany, and had a botany major for a while, and realized that's just, I wasn't able to study what I wanted to. So I made my own degree program through Prescott College, which is why it sounds really funny, medicinal plant biology, which was basically botany and nutrition was my minor. And so it was.
I mean, when you say
basically
medicinal
botany.
plant biology, the immediate thing that comes to my head is psychedelics. We're not talking about that, are we?
No.
I'm like, plant medicine. She's talking plant medicines.
I created my own degree program, so I basically did all the pre-med requirements. I did the nutrition requirements, I did the botany requirements, and then I added in some of my own stuff. I apprenticed with an acupuncturist. I did some herbal medicine courses and on the side, and
And all of this was before the age of 18?
When did I graduate from college? I was probably 20 by the time I graduated from college, because I started at 16. So yeah.
Wow. All right. So that's crazy. So you didn't even have like your senior year of high school and prom.
No, never went to dances. Never. I mean, even in college, I was so focused. I was just so excited to be studying something I loved, even though college wasn't exactly what I wanted to study. I was really spending a lot of time reading up on Chinese medicine and Ayurveda and herbal medicine and all these things I really loved about on the side. But I was just so happy to be able to study. I've always loved school and loved learning, and I was just happy to be there. So I didn't really do any of the typical college or high school things.
It doesn't sound like it. A very different experience than mine. And so all the while, you're like doing these Ashtanga practices in this guy's garage?
So when I went off to college, there wasn't really any yoga around me, so that was what spurred me to go and do a teacher training. And at the time, there was no internet. I remember getting a couple pamphlets in the mail. I actually remember calling my teacher and asking him what he recommended. I think he was so thrown off by the fact that I'd only been practicing for a couple of years and wanted to teach, and that I was so young. He didn't really help me at all.
You see, but that's funny. Well, not funny, but that goes to a lot of recent discussions. I mean, it was a different time in yoga, and the way you became a teacher usually was you just had to show up consistently until someone said, okay, you're ready. There wasn't like these like formalized 200-hour trainings. So interesting. He didn't have anywhere to point you. Yeah,
and here I was, the 16-year-old girl. I was like, I'm going to do this. There's not much there. There's no studios, so I'm just going to make it happen. I really liked teaching my friends and family, so I'm gonna do this thing. And I ended up at there was a month-long program in my summer there, and in the summertime, and I ended up at the Expanding Light, the Ananda Institute, and did my teacher training with them, which was very different than, I didn't really know Ashtanga or that I was doing Ashtanga or what it was at the time, but it was very different than the Ashtanga-like stuff I was doing. It was very much focused on enlightenment, meditation, and spirituality, and they did affirmations with very simple hatha poses, and I think it gave me a really great, I didn't know it at the time, but it gave me a great foundation in, philosophy and the spiritual side of the practice that I wasn't expecting.
So you started teaching at age 16. How soon after your training did you start teaching?
Yeah, I went back and started teaching right away. And I remember feeling like I really enjoyed the spiritual side of it, but I remember always feeling like I kind of had to hide it from my parents a little bit. And I think this does show up in my teaching, not necessarily not the hiding it from my parents, but really wanting it to be open to all religions, all walks, all faiths. I really love the spiritual side of yoga, but it for me can be somewhat limiting when we get into some of the lineages and specifics. And I'm just so conscious of that, people who are religious and their thoughts behind that I really am conscious of the language that I use of I don't want to whitewash it. I don't want to take away the essence of the teachings, and there's a fine line, I think, between whitewashing it and taking away the essence of what's really important there, and still making it all inclusive. And there's a fine line, I think, between yoga as what can kind of borderline on a religious practice, and yoga as a spiritual practice, which is, open to anyone. And, back in the 90s, it really was seen as more of a religious practice. We fought for a long time to try and, get people aware of the fact that, you don't have to be a certain religion to practice yoga. You don't have to be Hindu or Buddhist, or, you can have your own religion.
Well, I was always taught that it wasn't religion, but it was sort of like a spiritual path. It wasn't fitness in the early 90s. That's for sure. And so when you got back from your training at 16, what did you teach? Did you teach Ashtanga, or did you do guided meditations?
No, I taught what I learned. So it wasn't just meditation, but the whole purpose of the yoga practice was to prepare you for meditation. Right. No, I taught Ananda style yoga for, I don't know, maybe a couple of years, and then eventually I it was a few years, and then I eventually went back to Ashtanga.
I see. And when you went back to Ashtanga, who was your teacher then?
I studied with a lot of different Ashtanga teachers. I studied with Tabi Joyce. I studied with David Swenson, Tim Miller. I would say those would be the three main people I studied Ashtanga with. I did trainings with Tim and David.
I see.
This is a long time ago now.
Yeah, I'm sure. I had my Ashtanga time too. I blew out a knee at one point. That kind of turned my path from it. But I'm just sort of...
Yeah, luckily I had very flexible hips always, so the knees were never my issue. I finished 4th series and then blew out my back. I had a herniated disc. And, I was seeing patients at the time. I was teaching Vinyasa and Ashtanga, and I was still practicing Ashtanga, and it was a big wake-up call for me, because I was seeing patients. My specialty, sports medicine, always has been orthopedics and sports medicine, and I was seeing all these patients and giving all these things, and I'm like, why am I not teaching classes? So when I hurt my back, with this in mind, and when I hurt my back, it was a good wake-up call to really change the way I taught. And
that's interesting. Didn't you, from a sports medicine standpoint, question things that you were doing in your Ashtanga practice?
I don't know. That's a good question. It was a long time ago now. I think I did a little, but I think I really liked what a lot of people like is showing up to be able to not think about the poses, to be able to have it be more of a movement meditation, the lineage, the respect for the guru, being able to follow this thing that was, I was still bought into all that, like, okay, Guruji says you need to do it this way, so you do it this way, and or, students will go study with him and he would tell them something and then they would come back and enforce it on all of their students as if that's what he meant for everyone. It's hard because his English wasn't great, and there are people who've studied with him much more than I have that can speak better to this, but my interpretation of it was, maybe was that just for me? Was that advice just for me? Was that for everyone?
Did you?
I don't know. I have a lot of opinions on it now, but
I'm curious. Did you? No, it's a current topic right now. I don't know if you know, Mary Taylor, Richard Freeman's wife, just put out a blog post about Patabi Joyce, and then Rain from the early video responded. It's sort of like a hot topic right now.
I haven't seen it.
Oh, well, I'm curious, did you study with Patabi Joyce when he made his trips here? Did you take a trip to India to study with him? Both. Yeah. And, well, the controversy is that, there's those pictures of him doing those, like, inappropriate assists. And, for a long time, there have been some people who've come on this podcast who've, spoken about that and about the people who enabled him at that time. And in this post that Mary Taylor wrote, she kind of admitted that she knew about it back when, and sort of along with this Me Too campaign. And one of the women who, was in one of the original Ashtanga videos, like there's a video that has Richard Freeman and Eddie Stern. It's like the classic. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she was one of the women in that video, and she's one of the women who's been very vocal about how much she was sexually assaulted by him. And so there's been quite a controversy about what to do about that. Like, now it's kind of admitted that this stuff happened, and then people are sort of like, it's that classic question, I guess, can you separate the teacher from the teachings? And are the people who knew about it and didn't say anything back then, are they complicit in this abuse?
Yeah. I can't speak to the specifics of that. I don't know. I'm never the one that gets.
He never palpated your perineum.
Nope, never had any of that. I mean, I honestly never get hit on when I'm teaching. I think I'm just a nerd at heart. People I don't put off the sexual vibe. I mean, not that that's at all their fault. But maybe I wasn't there long enough. I'm not really sure. I can't speak to that because I've never had that from him.
Well, they say that there were like these periods of time where someone went to him and then he stopped doing it, but then later on it would happen again. But there were like periods of time where he wasn't doing it.
I mean, I don't think it's good or it's right. I mean, I think it's interesting to see in the world of yoga, we have many lineages of yoga with for whatever reason, they've always been male figureheads that have had this happen to them. I mean, I think many of the big gurus in the yoga world have had sexual scandals at some point in their career, and hopefully, I mean, maybe they've learned from it. Maybe that's just not not to say that what they did was okay. It makes me nauseous to think about this happening in the yoga world, because there is a level of trust and I mean, as a yoga teacher, it was instilled in me, and I instilled it in our teachers. Like, there's a power differential, and it's our job not to abuse that. Just like when you go to medical school, like, you learn about these things. A yoga teacher, somewhat even more so, people put you up on this pedestal, and I don't want to use bad language, but
you're welcome to on this podcast. We always use the little explicit label.
Yeah, I mean, it pisses me off. I mean, the fact that people would use that power, and again, I can't speak. I haven't personally had those dealings with Tabi Joyce. My interactions have been limited with him, but I don't know why there's no reason to believe that they weren't true. I mean, obviously these things happened. It's come up over and over and over again, and I think it's mind-blowing to me. It's hard for me to even wrap my head around that someone would do that. It's hard for me to wrap my head around this guru that we put up on a pedestal, and obviously we're all human, right? Like the John Friend thing, like I remember watching him fall and thinking, like, it's really sad to see that someone who's created so much can fall so quickly. Mm-hmm. And that all that you've created in your lifetime can kind of dissipate so fast. And obviously that doesn't make our actions right or wrong. I always just love to see both sides of things. I've had friends who, I've seen many people affected by this, coming out with the Me Too campaign, and it's so great to see it coming to light and us shedding some light on a big issue. But there's always both sides. I know people who have been accused of things who have not done them, or maybe has been. Yeah. So well, I mean, like to me, look at both sides.
I mean, kind of coming back to where we were in our conversation, it goes to, in my mind, that there's a new paradigm, a new context in which yoga classes happen, and part of that is because, a confluence of things, one, a lot of these figureheads, like, passing away, a lot of these, like, gurus are no longer on the planet, and also, the way things are happening in our culture in, like, a larger sphere, like, forget about yoga. And I just think that, the times in the past where teachers just came up and did, like, really harsh assists on your body without asking you first, that doesn't happen anymore. Now we've got flip chips and consent cards and stuff, and I think I was somebody who's sort of resistant. I'm sort of this, like, the old time, you had to earn it more, and, like, this, like, old curmudgeon-y guy. But I'm more and more, I'm like, no, you know what? This is the people who are coming into yoga now did not know the guru systems like you and I had an experience of them.
Yeah.
They've never known that. They never knew the time before the internet. So, you know what I mean?
And
Like,
no one will, because it doesn't exist anymore.
well, it's just
It's like, it doesn't exist unless it's on the internet.
well, but the framing for yoga changed with all of that, I think, is kind of what.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's so cool to see women stand up now. I'm so happy to see it all come out. There's always, I think within the yoga world, I think there's always pros and cons to, the adjusting styles, how we interact, what were their intentions? I don't know, and I can't speak to that, but hopefully I'm just happy to see that people are able to speak up and talk about these things, and to confidently come forward and share some of these things and shed some light on something, so that, we can, as a community, have some better background knowledge to move forward.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.